Hi everyone, this is Andrew Primer, Ukrainian American, reporting from Kiev. In today's podcast, this is week 147 of Russian invasion of Ukraine, and this is the last week of December 2024, or the last week of the year of 2024. Today's podcast, we're going to talk about Russia shuts down another passenger aircraft and tries to cover the trace. And we're going to talk about that Russia thinks the war will end on their terms, but the US has a different view on this. Last week, Russia shut down a passenger aircraft of Azerbaijan Airlines. On December 25, 38 passengers were killed on Wednesday after Azerbaijan Airlines Flight 4832 crashed as it attempted to make an emergency landing near the city of Aktau in Kazakhstan. Azerbaijani government confirmed that a Russian surface-to-air missile caused the Azerbaijan airline plane crash in Aktau city in Kazakhstan on Wednesday. The missile was fired at flight 8432 during the drone air activity above Grozny in Chechnya, and the shrapnel hit the passengers and cabin crew as it exploded next to the aircraft mid flight. The government of Azerbaijan confirmed that the damaged aircraft was not allowed to land at any Russian airports, despite the pilot's request for an emergency landing, and it was ordered to fly across the Caspian Sea towards Aktau in Kazakhstan. So, here is the situation the pilots had to deal with. The plane could not return to Azerbaijan uh, over the mountains due to the hydraulic failure. It was no longer gaining altitude, and the cabin was also depressured. The Russians sent the airline into the sea, literally to certain death, hoping it was not going to be able to make it over the Caspian Sea. But the pilots failed their executioner's plans. They not only made it to Kazakhstan but also managed to land the plane so that half of the passengers remained alive. And these people can tell how everything really went. If you understand it, it's simply an absolute miracle. And now, the main meaning of this story is not even that the Russian armed forces shut down a civilian plane. This, unfortunately, is almost a common thing for the terrorists, but that the Kremlin tried to cover up the trace of the crime by downing the plane and the witness who were still alive in the camp and kill the witnesses who still were alive in the Caspian Sea. This certainly cannot be called a tragic mistake. Someone in Moscow consciously gave a cold-blooded order to get rid of all 68 passengers on board of this plane of this aircraft. Who could have given such an order? We know who. There is only one person in Russia who has enough power and authority to do this. This is a Russian dictator, Vladimir Putin. And as you know, this is not the first passenger plane that the Russian Federation shut down in the last several decades. If Russia thinks the war will end on their term, actually the West doesn't think so. Public conversation, not public consultation, and negotiations are active on a possible truce. Reports already coming from everywhere that something is being discussed. Donald Trump wrote a message to Vladimir Zelensky in which he said that it's necessary to prepare for peace on the condition of partial renunciation of Ukrainian territories. As Donald Trump said, Ukrainians are pleased to say that they want to return their lands, but the cities are destroyed. If you look at some of these cities, you will see that there is not a single surviving building left. So when you say return the country, what is there to return? The settlements of Ukraine destroyed in the fighting will need 110 years of reconstruction. That is, Trump says that you have nothing much to return, so don't worry about this topic. And this is a particular way, as I understand it, Trump wants to calm the Ukrainians a little, to say that you will not lose too much if you don't return this territory. The territory is totally was with the territory and the towns on it were completely wiped out from the surface. But of course, it doesn't sound very pleasant. The meaning of these words is that you will not be able to return it, and then maybe later there is going to be a small chance to get those territories back to Ukraine. At the same time, President Volodymyr Zelensky admitted in one of his recent interviews that Ukraine cannot win back Crimea and Donbass under the current situation and conditions. There are not enough military forces for this. There are not enough reserves for this at the moment. In general, of course, this is a recognition of reality. We need to face the truth, the president said. The reality is it's impossible to return these territories by military means, and we have to make a hard choice. President Zelensky and President and future President Trump understand that until the moment of Vladimir Putin's death or removal from the power, not all but many of these territories currently seized by him will be under the rule of the Russian Federation. However, at the same time, Russia's sovereignty over these territories will not be recognized by either the international community or, of course, by Ukraine. When will these territories be returned and under which circumstances? So I think this might happen when Putin is either removed from the power or he dies or executed in one way or another. And the new Russian elites, who of course do not need Kurakhove, Pokrovsk, or even Donetsk and Luhansk at all, will say this: let's somehow come to an agreement in such way that we'll leave all these territories, pay you compensation for the destruction, and the international community lifts the sanctions from the Russian Federation. I think this is will be the only reasonable way to at least somehow agree on a future life. In Russia, everyone understands that one way or another they will have to negotiate, they will have to give up all these invaded territories, but they understand that while Putin is in power, it is impossible to even start a conversation about like returning these territories to Ukraine because anyone who raises such a topic will be immediately put in prison or even killed. But the new elites, those people who will replace Putin, might be ready to discuss this issue at least. Most likely, they will simply give up these territories because everyone in Russia is indifferent. When Russian troops first captured Kherson, then they left Kherson, the first event in Russia didn't even cause any joy. The second event didn't cause any sadness. So, in my opinion, these territories will be returned to Ukraine sooner or later, but after the death of removal from the Russian dictator. However, despite the Ukrainians' willingness to compromise, Trump continues to publicly pretend now what it is that it's not Vladimir Putin but Vladimir Zelensky who continues to follow the path of escalation and remain the main obstacle to peace. Because Trump, for example, schooled, scolded Zelensky for launching American missiles at Russian territory. Well, the logic in his statements and the speeches of his supporters is approximately this: we will now convince Ukraine to make peace, and it's all in the head. Peace will come immediately. Of course, this is not true because Vladimir Putin will have to be persuaded. But I think that Trump is making such statements now. Why? Because he doesn't want to quarrel with Putin before he takes office. That is, before January 20th, when the new president's inauguration will take place in Washington. Trump is supposedly making such courtesies to Putin, supposedly hinting that Zelensky is bad, that you are good, and that since you are good, then agree to everything I offer you. But Trump makes it clear that the war cannot end on purely Russian terms, and that Russia, to be the good side, in quotes, must compromise in Trump's eyes, of course. I think an essential part of this compromise will be Trump's agreement on the American side to talk directly with dictator Putin. And for Putin, the ideal format for ending this war is first to establish a pro Russian regime in Kiev, and then to consolidate this situation, there should be negotiations with Trump, direct negotiations during which Putin and Trump would simply, so to speak, draw with a pencil on the map of Europe and on the world map as well as the spheres of influence of Russia and the United States. And the most important thing for Putin is this sense is that the Americans undertake not to interfere in Ukrainian affairs in any way, never and under any circumstances, and thus leave Ukraine completely at Russian disposal. At first, Putin would like to see a pro Russian government established in Kiev, and then the Americans refused to intervene. But the very fact of holding negotiations with the American president is super important for Putin to emphasize that he is not isolated, that he still remains a great world leader with whom they meet, with whom they seriously discussed all these geopolitical issues. Not just anyone, but the world's Tsar, Russian Tsar, as Putin perceives himself, because for him, the American president is the most important boss in the world. And now Putin wants this most important boss to talk to him directly. Putin wants to conclude a kind of version of the Yalta Agreement with his counterpart. And by the way, it is still important for Putin. Why? Because in this case, he will not even have to sit down at the negotiating table with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, whom Putin hates, doesn't perceive as his equal, and doesn't recognize as his equal. And in general, he's afraid. He's afraid that President Zelensky is too unconventional for him. And for Putin, it is still essential to understand who he is dealing with, even to understand his enemy. He doesn't understand Zelensky at all. He doesn't understand his motivation, and he doesn't understand anything. Because when Zelensky, for example, refused to flee Kiev somewhere at the very beginning of the full scale war in 2022, I think it was a complete shock for, for President of Russia, Vladimir Putin. Because remember, when the same Prigozhin was going to Moscow, do you remember the coup back in 2023? Putin flee quickly to his northern residence on a plane. But Zelensky, in this situation, didn't do this. And for Putin, this is such a very unpleasant moment because Zelensky showed himself as a strong leader who doesn't flee his people. Zelensky himself as a person that is very unpleasant to Russian dictator. Therefore, of course, who would like to somehow deal with him to make sure that he is gone, and so that he doesn't have to talk to him or hold negotiations with him. So Trump makes it clear that he's ready to start negotiations with Putin about dividing the world. Well, how does he make it clear? He hints at it. He stated a little confusedly here with a quote: "These crazy wars that we are in, one of the things that I want to do quickly, meaning to end." And Russian President Putin said that he wants to meet with me as soon as possible, but he have to stop this war. It is terrible. It is terrible because soldiers are being killed. Well, you can't argue with that. The war is really terrible. Soldiers are being killed there on a daily basis. And as you know, in 2024, Russia lost a little bit over 100 soldiers to invade 1 square kilometer of Ukrainian territory. But the implication is that the Trump is showing Putin that he's willing to meet with him. And this willingness itself is very expensive for Putin. He would like such a meeting, of course. Putin would not even want it, and he would probably dream of such a meeting. However, I have great doubts that Trump will simply hand over Ukraine like a gift to dictator Putin. The psychological aspect here is this: Trump considers himself the greatest super mega leader of all nations. He has really puffed himself up to some incredible extent. If you read American newspapers, watch American television or political podcasts, all the people around Trump say that he has really begun to perceive himself as a demigod who sits not even on the highest mountain but somewhere in the sky above the whole world. From there, he gives instructions to small people on what to do and what not to do. In this sense, he's not going to argue with Putin. He's not going to negotiate. He's not going to have any negotiation with the Russian dictator. No, he's going to give instructions. Instructions to dictator Putin what to do. And based on these instructions, if Putin agrees to follow this instruction at all, then he will be treated one way. If he doesn't agree, the attitude will be totally different. However, Moscow was very happy about these signals from Washington, and there is a certain and there is the Putin's assistant Yuri Ushakov, the assistant for international affairs, said that different states are now already offering themselves as a platform for the future meeting of Trump and Putin. And in general, he spoke about it with great joy. It seems to me that people in the Kremlin are already rubbing their hands, preparing for the fact that Putin and Trump will meet in the near future, and Putin will give him another lecture about the rebels and other things that happen on Ukrainian territory, and that he is trying to defend a Russian-speaking population. Well, the meaning of all these stories and Putin propaganda, of course, be the same. It will be that Ukraine doesn't exist at all, that it's a construct is created by the Austro-Hungarian general staff or Lenin or both. But well, in general, look, I don't even mind Putin giving such a lecture to Trump. Trump, of course, will get tired of it at this point, and he won't listen to anything. He will say, yes, do as I'm told you to do, and let's finish this war on this and on these terms. And you know very well, if Putin doesn't follow Donald Trump lead, he will piss off a new U.S. president. And what might happen? Putin might regret about that, because if Trump failed his promises to end the war in the short terms, he will definitely supply Ukraine with as much weapons as possible in order to defeat the Russian dictator. Thank you for listening. If you like my podcast, share it with your friends.